They didn't have to scream. They didn't even need to whisper. All it took was one look across that boardroom table, and I knew I wasn't part of them. Not really. Not ever. I stood in a corner of the glass-walled conference room, back straight, hands clasped behind me like I was bracing for impact. My name was printed neatly on the attendance sheet for that morning's board meeting. Harper L. Whitmore, a name I had signed 100 times, a name I had buried pieces of myself under just to feel like I belonged, and yet they never saw me. Not as one of them. My half-sister Celeste was seated dead center, red lips, silver watch. She always looked like she was posing for a Legacy magazine cover. Beside her, Daniel, the middle brother, sharp suit, sharp tongue. At the far end sat Uncle Reginald, technically not a blood relative, but one who wielded more power than any of us. My father's lawyer, Mr. Easton, cleared his throat. As per Mr. Whitmore's final arrangements, all direct descendants were invited to attend this special session regarding transitional leadership. Transitional leadership. Translation, who gets the throne? A hush fell across the room. Celeste lifted her eyes to me slowly, like she was assessing a scratch on her new car. Her voice, syrupy sweet and cold as ice. Oh, she's here. She has a right to be, Easton replied, a flicker of defiance in his tone. He looked at me briefly, apologetically, almost, and turned the page. Daniel chuckled under his breath. This ought to be fun. I knew what they thought of me. Illegitimate. The result of a mistake my father made during his 1-year separation from his first wife. Raised by my mother, quiet, bookish, alone on the other side of the city, away from the private schools and ski lodges and charity auctions. I was the line in the obituary they'd rather skip. The footnote at best, the embarrassment at worst. Still, I stood there. Still, I listened. Still, I held my breath. They read the shares, the allocations, the appointments. Celeste was named interim CEO, Daniel, head of global strategy. Reginald retained advisory power. And me, nothing, not a single word about a position, not an honorary seat, not even a silent vote, just silence. Then Celeste spoke again. I mean, you didn't really expect anything official, did you? Harper. The room chuckled. Even Easton pressed his lips together. I didn't flinch. She leaned forward, eyes gleaming. Look, you're smart. I'll give you that. And I'm sure Dad, bless his conflicted heart, wanted you to feel included. But this company, it's not a charity. And you're not qualified. Not qualified, I repeated, softly. Daniel shrugged. You've never even worked in corporate. You have what, some undergrad degree in literature, Celeste smirked. Maybe she thought she'd write our annual reports in iambic pentameter. Another wave of laughter. But what cut deeper wasn't what they said. It was what no one said. Not a single person stood up for me. Not the lawyer, not the advisors, not the board. My father was dead. And with him, the only bridge I ever had into this empire. I looked at the table, the branding, the logo behind them, Whitmore Holdings, built on real estate, old money, reputation. My blood ran in its foundation, yet I was treated like I didn't even exist. Celeste sighed and stood. Well, I think we've wasted enough time. Let's move forward, shall we? The room began to rise. But I didn't move. I waited until every eye reluctantly returned to me. And then I said it. No worries. I won't waste your time again. Celeste blinked. Excuse me. I walked slowly toward the table, my heels echoing like punctuation marks on marble. I placed both palms flat against the mahogany and leaned in. You think I'm not qualified? But none of you have ever seen what I'm capable of. Daniel scoffed. Is that a threat? I looked at him, really looked, and for the first time in my life, I didn't feel small. No, I said. It's a promise. Then I turned, walked to the door, and pulled it open without a word. The hallway was quiet. My heart wasn't. I kept walking past portraits of Whitmores who never knew my name, past employees who avoided my eyes, past the history that had never included me. And once I stepped outside, I let the mask fall. The wind hit my face like truth. They saw me as nothing, but I had learned something they hadn't. They inherited their power. I would earn mine. And one day they'd call me qualified. Not because I proved it to them, but because I'd owned the place they were so desperate to keep me out of. I didn't cry that day. Not when they laughed. Not when they called me unqualified. Not even when I walked past my father's name engraved in the building's marble and realized it would never include mine. But I did cry that night, not out of weakness, out of ignition. I remember the motel I checked into that evening. Not a hotel, no. I couldn't stand to sleep in luxury after being told I didn't belong in it. The room smelled like bleach and old carpet, and the sink faucet leaked. I sat on the corner of the bed with a plastic cup of vending machine coffee, bitter and cheap, and stared at my own reflection in the cracked mirror. I didn't see a victim. I saw a challenge. They handed me humiliation, served cold on fine china. So I decided I'd serve something hotter. Revenge, not quite. Legacy. I emptied what little savings I had, most of it from a modest inheritance my mother left me before she passed. I used it to rent a one-bedroom apartment in a crumbling building with spotty Wi-Fi and broken elevators. Then I took a job at a supply chain startup, not because I wanted to, but because I needed to learn. Logistics, procurement, fulfillment, operations, words they never thought I'd understand. Terms they assumed I couldn't pronounce, so I devoured them. I worked 10-hour days, 12-hour nights. I took night classes in data analytics, corporate strategy, supply chain modeling. Every time I wanted to sleep, I remembered Celeste's smile, that slow, condescending curl of her lip, and I kept going. There was a man who changed everything. His name was Graham Liu. Former partner of my father, retired early, brilliant, blunt, and quietly watching everything from the shadows. He'd been in that boardroom, seated quietly, saying nothing while I was humiliated. But weeks later, I received a single message in my inbox. You reminded me of your father that day, not in name, in fire, coffee, Thursday. I met him in a dusty cafe downtown, the kind with mismatched chairs and ceiling fans that squeaked. He wore no watch, no label, just quiet confidence and eyes that missed nothing. He slid a manila envelope across the table. What's this, I asked. A chance, he said, but only if you're hungrier than they are. Inside was a shell company, already formed, a basic operating agreement, and a list of names, contacts, investors, small-time logistics operators looking for funding, but too small for the Whitmores to notice. You think I can do this? I asked, barely above a whisper. He didn't smile. I don't think... I saw... That's how HL Strategic was born. No mention of Whitmore, no mention of legacy. Just 3 letters, mine. I worked from a folding desk in my apartment, using my neighbor's Wi-Fi when mine went out. I cold-called clients during the day, pitched investors over Zoom at night, and wrote white papers between midnight and dawn. I built dashboards. I learned contract law. I coded my first inventory tracking model with free tutorials. I lived on caffeine, adrenaline, and grudge-fueled clarity. And then came the break. One of Whitmore Holdings' lower-tier suppliers, a distribution center in Nebraska, was going bankrupt. I made an anonymous offer to buy out their tech and equipment, dirt cheap. No one even noticed it was me. That center became my first hub. Within a year, we had 3, then 6, then 14. Clients came quietly, then they stayed loudly. Because what the Whitmores didn't understand was this. They ran a company of legacy. I was building a company of necessity. While they polished their name, I sharpened my system. There were nights I slept under my desk. Mornings I cried in the shower from exhaustion. But I never complained, because the pain was mine. And when the success came, it would be mine, too. Graham called me one night. You've tripled valuation in 18 months. You ready for the next phase? I wiped the sweat from my face, sitting in my 3rd warehouse, dusty and humming with energy. What's the next phase? He didn't hesitate. Ownership. He explained what I hadn't known. Whitmore Holdings was bleeding. The shiny empire was cracking under bad investments and bloated management. They were desperate for capital, and they were selling minority shares, silently, to the right buyers, to me. Through layered shell companies, I began acquiring tiny chunks, 10,000 shares here, a seat on a shadow advisory panel there, no name on the surface, no noise, just silence. Celeste once said I'd never understand corporate. What she didn't know was that while she attended board meetings in silk blouses and smug smiles, I was becoming her silent partner. No one questioned the new capital injections. No one checked the source of the bridge loans. No one saw the trap being built from beneath. And then 6 months later, HL. Strategic announced a merger offer. Public, polite, but firm. They needed us. We didn't need them. I sat in my new glass office, high above the skyline, papers stacked, every number lining up. And on the last page of the proposal, the one that would place me as the majority stakeholder in the merged company, I paused. I didn't sign it yet. Not because I was scared, but because I wanted the moment to last. The one where Harper Whitmore Unqualified, invisible. The mistake realized I had built something they couldn't touch, and soon they'd work for me. Not because I was their blood, but because I bled for it. It was almost poetic. While they were sipping champagne at black tie fundraisers, I was sipping burnt coffee in warehouse meetings. While they were talking strategy in corner offices, I was laying bricks in silence. And while they were still laughing at the girl who tried to act corporate, that girl now held their leash and they didn't even know it. 6 months after my company went operational across 14 states, I had already bought into the Whitmore Holdings stock via 5 separate investment vehicles. Small enough not to trigger alarms, smart enough to gain influence. By month 7, I was sitting in quarterly advisory meetings, not as Harper Whitmore, as E.L. Carter, the legal name tied to one of my acquisitions. They never once looked twice at me. In fact, during one virtual board session, Daniel made a joke about rookie investors trying to play big league. I remember staring straight at the camera, muted mic, no video. His smug laugh filled my headphones. He had no idea he was laughing at his boss in the making. The real opening came with a scandal. One of Whitmore's regional VPs got caught in a bribery ring with an overseas supplier. The press caught wind. Their reputation plummeted. Clients panicked. Stockholders whispered. The board scrambled. They needed a buyout. They needed someone stable, someone discreet, someone with liquidity. They never thought it would be me. Graham sent the first offer under one of our larger entities, an acquisition proposal masked as a strategic alliance. It would inject capital, modernize logistics, streamline operations, and quietly shift controlling shares to HL. Strategic? Of course, they didn't know that HL was me, Celeste. True to form. Refused at first. She paraded onto the press stage with her rehearsed smile and empty confidence, promising reforms, transparency, and recovery, but 2 major clients pulled out. Their stock dropped another 14%, layoffs began. The executive floor panicked, and then she called for help. The emergency board meeting was held in person, private, no media, no assistants, no staff, just them, the core Whitmore bloodline and a few ghost investors, and 1 seat left empty, mine. I arrived late on purpose, 10 minutes past the hour, dressed in a matte black suit, hair slicked back, face calm. Every pair of eyes turned as I walked in. Celeste's jaw tightened. Daniel squinted. "Why is she here?" he whispered to someone. Easton, the same lawyer who once stood silent as they mocked me, looked like he'd seen a ghost. No one had officially invited me. No one knew I was now the majority voting entity in the room. I walked past the table, not around it, through it. And when I reached the head of the table, the chair once reserved for my father, I pulled it back and sat down, quiet, certain, unbothered. "Excuse me," Celeste snapped. "This is a board-level emergency meeting." I folded my hands. "I'm aware." Daniel leaned forward. "This is for shareholders." I tilted my head. "I am one. The biggest one." Laughter. Even Uncle Reginald chuckled. "Harper, sweetheart, this isn't a PR stunt." Easton cleared his throat. Hard. They stopped. He reached into his leather folder and slid out a document. It was thick, official. He didn't look at anyone when he said it. She's telling the truth. Silence. Pure, diamond-cut silence. I didn't blink. I now control 51.3% of voting rights through EL, Carter Investments, Northbourne Equity, and HL, Strategic. As of this morning, those entities merged. I am their sole beneficiary. Celeste's voice cracked. That's impossible. No, I said. It's legal. Daniel stood up. You're bluffing. Would you like the signed merger agreement from Graham Liu, I said, or the time-stamped SEC filings? He paled. Sit down. Daniel. The room was unraveling. I could smell the panic, the disbelief, the sudden realization that their little world gilded and safe was now mine. Celeste stood up slowly. Her voice was trembling, but her mask held. This company was built by our family. Yes, I nodded. And you tried to erase mine from it. You can't just walk in and take it all. I smiled. I didn't walk in to take it. I walked in because I already own it. What followed was chaos. Papers rustled. Voices overlapped. Threats were thrown. But none of it mattered. I had the power now, not just legally, emotionally, because I didn't scream. I didn't cry. I didn't seek revenge. I just sat still. And they watched their throne shift beneath them without ever being touched. The meeting ended with shock. I didn't fire anyone. Not yet. I just said 5 words. We'll resume this tomorrow. Then I stood up, walked out the same door they once slammed in my face. But this time, I held the keys. There's a strange kind of power in silence, not the passive kind, not weakness dressed as humility, real silence, the kind that walks into a room and makes people forget how to breathe. That's what the next morning felt like. 900 a.m. sharp. The entire executive suite had been summoned. Board members, department heads, legal counsel, even regional directors. Some wore confusion, some wore dread. A few, the smart ones, wore masks of practiced neutrality. And at the center of it all, me. The conference room was bigger than I remembered, the table longer, more polished, but the air still thick with the same old arrogance. Celeste sat exactly where she always had second seat from the head, like she was still in control, like nothing had changed. Until I entered. I didn't say a word. I just placed a single folder on the table, black leather, embossed, heavy. Inside were signed agreements, legal transitions, executive restructuring plans, and at the very top, my name, not hidden, not buried, stamped, centered, bold. Celeste's fingers twitched. Daniel shifted uncomfortably. Even Reginald leaned forward. I pulled out the top document and read calmly, evenly, effective immediately. Harper L. Whitmore assumes full executive control of Whitmore Holdings and all subsidiary entities, as the sole majority stakeholder and acting chairwoman. Someone gasped. I didn't flinch. Restructure begins today. Departmental evaluations will follow. Executive redundancies will be reviewed. Daniel barked a bitter laugh. You're firing us. I looked at him, truly looked. And what I saw wasn't a man. It was a child terrified that his world had shifted out of reach. No, I said. I'm giving you the chance to prove you deserve the salaries you've bled this company for. Celeste stood up. I won't take orders from someone who hasn't spent a day building this company. I met her eyes. You're right. A pause. Then I walked around the table. Slowly, like I owned each step because now, I did. I stopped behind her chair. But I've spent every day building the one that saved it. She turned, face flush with rage. You came back to humiliate me. No, I said. I came back because this company means something to me, even when I meant nothing to it. The room fell silent again, but this time, it was reverent. They were seeing it, not just the power, the clarity, the inevitability. I walked to the window and looked out at the city. The skyline was bleeding sunlight, the same skyline I used to stare at from the cracked window of my apartment, wondering if I'd ever belong. Now I didn't belong. I ruled. I turned back. My father built the foundation. You sat on it. I rebuilt it. Celeste opened her mouth, but I lifted a hand. I don't need your apology. I don't need your respect. This isn't about revenge. This is about reclaiming what should have never been denied. Daniel stood, too blustering. You think you're better than us? You think you can just... I don't think... I cut in. I know. Another silence. Then I pulled a final paper from the folder and slid it across the table. A new logo, simplified, stronger. And below it, a new slogan earned, not entitled. Celeste's voice cracked. You're changing the brand, no, I said softly. I'm giving it a soul. The meeting ended not with applause, not with outrage, but with something far more powerful: resignation, realization, reckoning. As I left the room, no one followed. They didn't need to. They knew who led now. And I didn't need to look back, because the moment I opened that door, the one they tried to keep locked, I understood something they never would. I never needed to be let in. I just needed to take the damn building. There's a misconception about revenge. People think it has to be loud, explosive, fiery, dramatic, a courtroom breakdown, a viral meltdown, a ruined name on the front page. But I learned something far more satisfying. Sometimes, the most powerful revenge is silence. Weeks passed after the takeover. No press conferences, no viral rebranding campaigns, no grand speeches, just change, quiet, steady, undeniable. I didn't fire Celeste. I let her stay on as head of brand strategy. She tried to act unaffected, showed up in her designer suits, held meetings with the same poisoned poise. But the room no longer bowed to her. People listened, but they looked at me. Not because I demanded it, because the air around her had shifted, and she could feel it, even if she'd never admit it. Daniel resigned within the month. He couldn't handle the humiliation. Or maybe it was the fact that every single pitch he made was now subject to my review. No more unchecked bluster. No more boardroom arrogance. He left with a shallow press release and a carefully filtered photo. But his eyes were hollow. Reginald stayed quiet until the end. He approached me one evening after hours, when the halls were still and the building echoed. "You play the long game better than your father ever did," he said. I didn't respond. He waited, but I didn't bite. Finally, he chuckled and added cold silence. "That's the most dangerous kind." He was right. And then he walked out. The company changed. We partnered with grassroots suppliers. We restructured profit shares to reward innovation, not just tenure. We created mentorship programs not for Ivy League interns, but for women, single mothers, immigrants, people like my mother, who had once worked 2 jobs while raising me. I changed the decor of the lobby. Gone were the golden portraits of past Whitmores. In their place, a single installation, black steel, etched with 6 words: earned, not entitled, built in silence. Some visitors walked past it without noticing, but those who understood stopped. One day, as I reviewed quarterly projections in my office, Celeste knocked. She looked smaller somehow, not physically, but in the way her presence no longer demanded the air around her. She stepped in, hands folded. "I'd like to resign," she said quietly. I studied her for a long moment, then stood, walked over, not with anger, not with satisfaction, just peace. "Why?" Her lips trembled for a second. "Because I finally understand. This company. It was never ours." She looked up at me. "It was always his, but now it's yours." For the first time, I didn't see my sister. I saw a woman raised to inherit power, but never to deserve it. And in that moment, I didn't feel rage, I felt release. "Thank you," I said, "not for stepping down, but for reminding me why I had to build it without you." She left the office in silence. I didn't watch her go. That evening, I stood alone in the office. The city glowed beneath me, not mocking me this time, but mirroring me. I opened the drawer of my desk and pulled out an old photo me at 18, standing outside the Whitmore building, holding a crumpled rejection letter in one hand and a dream that didn't fit anywhere. I folded it, once more, and tucked it back, because I didn't need it anymore. They said I wasn't qualified. They laughed at me, so I built the place they laughed from, brick by brick, in silence, not for applause, not even for justice, but for myself. Because when you earn something without entitlement, when you carve a seat at the table that once shunned you, when you turn their throne into your stepping stone, you don't need to scream. You just need to walk in, own the room, and let the